On the night of June 5, 1944, thousands of men jumped into darkness over Normandy with their pockets full of weapons most Americans have never heard of. Some were silent enough to drop a sentry without waking the man beside him. Others turned a single soldier into a walking anti-tank team. Number 14 on this list was so simple a paratrooper could assemble the charge himself in the plane on the way over. And number 1 was so far ahead of its time that engineers were still copying its design 40 years later. These were the tools of men dropped behind enemy lines with no supply, no backup, and no way home until the beaches broke through. Before we count them down, hit that subscribe button because most of these weapons vanished the moment the war ended. Let's begin with number 25. Number 25. The Hawkins mine looked like nothing more than a flat metal lunchbox, and that was exactly the point. British and American paratroopers stuffed these anti-tank charges into their leg bags because they weighed under 2.5 pounds and could be laid in seconds across a road a German column was expected to use. A soldier simply snapped a chemical igniter into the top, dropped the mine in the dirt, and the weight of a passing wheel or track crushed the glass ampule inside, triggering the blast. At Normandy, small groups of airborne troops strung these across country lanes to seal off crossroads long before armor arrived. They could also be chained together and yanked across a road by hand as a truck approached. Cheap, flat, and disposable, the Hawkins mine did the work of a heavy tank obstacle at a fraction of the weight, then disappeared from memory once the war was won. Number 24. The M2 Switchblade was not built to kill a man. It was built to save one. When a paratrooper's canopy snagged on a church steeple or tangled in the branches of a Norman apple orchard, he hung there helpless, a slow swinging target for any rifleman below. The M2 lived in a small pocket sewn onto the chest of the jump jacket, and with one gloved hand, a trapped man could flick the blade open and saw through his own shroud lines before the enemy found their range. The spring-loaded automatic action meant it opened even with cold, wet, or wounded fingers. Thousands of jumpers carried one and never used it. But for the men cut loose from a snagged chute in the dark, this little folding knife was the difference between reaching the ground and never fighting at all. Today, it survives mostly in collectors' drawers. Number 23. The FP-45 Liberator was the crudest firearm ever mass-produced, and that was the entire idea. Stamped out of sheet metal for about $2 a piece, this single-shot 45 caliber pistol was so simple it came with a wordless comic strip instruction sheet, because the men it was meant for might not read English. Dropped by the crate load to resistance fighters behind German lines, the Liberator held one bullet, took a pencil to poke the empty casing out, and was accurate only across a dinner table. The plan was brutal in its logic. A partisan used it once at point-blank range to kill an enemy soldier and take his real rifle. More than 1 million were made in a matter of months. Most were never fired. But the ones that were changed the arithmetic of occupation, one stolen weapon at a time, before the whole ugly little gun was quietly forgotten. Number 22. The Fliegerkopfmesser was the German answer to the same problem the Americans solved with the Switchblade, and it was arguably more elegant. This gravity knife lived in the trousers of every Fallschirmjäger who jumped over Crete and the Low Countries. There was no spring. A soldier simply held the handle, pressed a lever, and the blade fell free under its own weight, locking into place with a snap he could feel through his glove. a spike folded out alongside it for working knots and lines. The genius was that it required exactly one hand, leaving the other free to grip a tangled shroud or a rifle. German paratroopers prized these blades, and captured examples became sought-after souvenirs among Allied troops. After the war, the gravity knife lived on in various armies, but the original Luftwaffe pattern, with its distinctive folding spike, faded into obscurity. Number 21. The Welgun was a weapon that almost was. Cooked up by British special operations for men who had to fold their gear tight against their bodies before stepping into the slipstream, this compact submachine gun was shorter and handier than the standard Sten, with a folding stock and a magazine that fed from the side to keep the profile low. It fired the same 9mm rounds and could be built cheaply, which the sabotage planners loved. Only a few hundred were ever made before official indifference and inter-service squabbling killed the program, and the Sten kept its place by sheer momentum. Yet the Welgun was, by many accounts, the better gun, lighter and more reliable than the weapon it never replaced. A handful reached agents in the field. The rest gathered dust, a lost design that deserved better than the footnote history gave it. Number 20. The Bangalore torpedo was less a weapon than a battering ram made of explosive. Paratroopers and glider troops carried these long metal tubes, each packed with high explosive, in sections that screwed together end to end like a plumber's nightmare. When a squad hit a belt of German barbed wire or a mined obstacle, they slid the assembled pipe underneath, took cover, and blew a clean lane straight through. On D-Day, the Bangalore opened paths that let entire units move off the killing ground. The design was so effective, it had barely changed since the First World War, and it worked because it was blunt and honest. No moving parts, no aiming, just a corridor of destruction cleared in a single roar. Modern armies still use its descendants, but few civilians today have any idea that a metal pipe once opened the door to Fortress Europe. Number 19. The Mark II grenade earned its nickname the moment a soldier held one. Its cast-iron body was scored into little squares like the skin of a pineapple, and every American paratrooper jumped with several clipped to his harness. The scoring was meant to help it fragment, and when the 4-second fuse burned down, that iron shell burst into a lethal spray across a room or a foxhole. In the hedgerows of Normandy, where a man could not see 50 feet, the grenade became the great equalizer, lobbed over a wall or through a farmhouse window to clear what a rifle could not reach. Troopers learned to cook them, releasing the spoon and counting off a second or two so the enemy had no time to throw it back. Reliable, simple, and deadly at close range, the pineapple was the constant companion of the airborne soldier throughout the war. Number 18. The bazooka gave a single paratrooper the power to kill a tank, and that had never been possible before. This shoulder-fired rocket launcher was a hollow tube that a two-man team loaded from the rear, and it broke down into pieces small enough to stuff into a jumper's kit or a supply bundle. When the rockets streaked out and struck armor, a shaped charge punched a molten jet straight through the steel. For men dropped behind the lines with no artillery and no tanks of their own, the bazooka was survival itself, the only thing standing between a lightly armed platoon and a German panzer rolling down a country road. It was temperamental, its early rockets sometimes failed, and a man had to let the enemy come dangerously close. But the sight of a burning tank stopped by a soldier with a tube on his shoulder rewrote the rules of the battlefield. Number 17. The Welrod was designed to do one thing and to do it in near total silence. This bolt-action pistol looked more like a bicycle pump than a firearm, a long tube with a magazine that doubled as the grip. Its integral suppressor was so effective that the loudest sound it made was the click of the bolt being worked by hand between shots. Agents and airborne raiders carried it for the grim, close work of the Shadow War, slipping up on a sentry in the dark and firing a single subsonic round from a few feet away. There was no muzzle flash to give away a position, no bark to bring reinforcements running. It was slow, awkward, and utterly without romance, a tool for killing quietly and vanishing. Because of the secrecy that surrounded everything it touched, the Welrod remained largely unknown for decades, a ghost weapon whispered about long after the men who used it were gone. Number 16. The Delisle carbine was the quietest firearm of the entire war, and standing next to it, most so-called silenced weapons were loud. Built on a modified rifle action and chambered for the same fat .45 pistol round the Thompson fired, its enormous integral suppressor wrapped the whole barrel. The subsonic bullet left the muzzle with barely more sound than a strong handshake, so faint that men who fired it in tests thought the gun had failed. Commandos and raiding parties dropped behind the lines, prized it for silencing guard dogs, sentries, and generators without alerting anyone within 100 yards. Very few were ever built, which only deepened its mystique. A soldier could work the bolt, fire, and move on while the enemy went right on believing the night was quiet. Few weapons have ever combined menace and stealth so completely, and fewer still have been so thoroughly forgotten. Number 15. The M3 submachine gun looked like something bolted together in a garage, and the troops named it accordingly. The grease gun was stamped and welded out of sheet metal to replace the expensive, beautifully machined Thompson, and it fired the same heavy .45 caliber slug at a slow, controllable rate. Paratroopers and tank crews took to it because it was compact. Its wire stock collapsed to almost nothing, and it simply did not care about mud or grit. It was ugly, it rattled, and it looked cheap because it was. But at close range in a hedgerow or a village street, that fat, slow bullet hit like a hammer. The grease gun was proof that a weapon did not need to be elegant to be effective, and it served so quietly and so long that it stayed in some armories for half a century, always overshadowed by its glamorous predecessor. Number 14. The gammon bomb was the closest thing the war had to a build-your-own explosive, and paratroopers loved it for exactly that reason. It came as a simple cloth bag with a special fuse screwed into the top, and the soldier decided how much plastic explosive to pack inside. A small charge became an anti-personnel grenade. Stuffed full and studded with scrap metal, or wrapped around the fuse, it became a bomb capable of wrecking a vehicle or blowing in a bunker door. American troopers at Normandy filled them on the flight over, kneading the malleable explosive into the bag like bread dough. On impact, the fuse fired instantly, with no timer to give the enemy a second's warning. A single man could carry several and tailor each one to whatever he found on the ground. Flexible, powerful, and improvised by design, the gammon bomb was the perfect weapon for men who never knew what they would face when they landed. Number 13. The 60mm mortar gave a scattered group of paratroopers their own pocket artillery, and behind enemy lines that mattered more than anything. Broken into 3 pieces, the tube, the base plate, and the bipod, it could be split among 3 men, dropped in a bundle, and reassembled in under a minute. A trained crew dropped shells down the barrel as fast as they could grab them, arcing high explosive over walls and hedgerows onto targets no rifle could touch. For airborne units cut off from the big guns supporting the beaches, this little mortar was the only way to reach out and hit an enemy who stayed under cover. It demanded skill. A good crew could walk their rounds onto a target by feel, and it demanded that a man haul the ammunition on his back. But few weapons let so few soldiers deliver so much firepower so far behind the lines. Number 12. The Browning automatic rifle anchored the paratrooper squad, and the man who carried it earned every ounce of its weight. The BAR was a heavy automatic rifle that fired the full-power rifle cartridge from a 20-round magazine, and it laid down the sustained fire that let everyone else move. In the close, chaotic fighting behind the lines, that stream of heavy bullets could pin a German squad in place or sweep a hedgerow clear. The trouble was the weight. Loaded with spare magazines, the BAR man staggered under a load that punished him on every jump and every march. But when a firefight erupted in a sunken lane and the enemy had the advantage of position, it was the BAR that answered, its deep hammering roar cutting through everything else. Squad after squad owed their lives to the one man willing to jump into the dark carrying it. Now, here is where the story turns, because the next weapons did not belong to the Allies at all. The Germans invented the modern paratrooper, and they armed him with tools that were, in some cases, years ahead of anything the Allies could match. Number 11. The Kar 98K bolt-action rifle was the backbone of the German soldier, and the Fallschirmjäger carried it into the mountains of Crete and the ruins of Monte Cassino. It was a superbly made weapon, accurate and rugged, chambered for a hard-hitting rifle round, and famous for the crisp, reliable snap of its bolt. But for a paratrooper, it carried a fatal flaw. It was long, and it could not be jumped with in the hand. So German airborne troops often dropped it in a separate container and landed with only a pistol, sprinting across open ground to reach their weapons while enemy fire hunted them. On Crete, this cost them dearly. Yet once armed, a Fallschirmjäger with a Kar 98K was a marksman to be feared, dug into a hillside and picking off attackers at ranges most soldiers never trained for. It was old-fashioned, and it was lethal in the right hands. Number 10. The MP-40 was the submachine gun the whole world pictured when it thought of the German soldier, and it deserved its reputation. Sleek, all metal and folding, it hung from the chest of paratroopers and assault troops alike, firing 9mm rounds at a smooth, controllable pace that made it easy to hold on target. Its folding stock and compact shape made it ideal for a man leaping from a plane or fighting room to room in a shattered town. German airborne troops used it to clear buildings and trenches where a long rifle was a liability, spraying short bursts as they moved. It was so well made and so effective that Allied soldiers happily turned captured examples on their former owners. Decades of war films fixed its silhouette in the popular imagination, yet the men who first jumped with it and what they endured to use it have largely slipped from memory. Number 9. The Bren gun was the light machine gun the British and their airborne forces trusted above all others, and its calm, deliberate personality was the secret. Fed from a curved magazine mounted on top, it fired at a slower rate than its German rivals, which sounds like a weakness until you understand what it bought. That slow, steady beat meant a gunner could hold his aim, conserve ammunition, and place his rounds with precision instead of hosing them across a field. British paratroopers dragged the Bren into the hell of Arnhem, where cut-off men held houses and bridges against overwhelming odds, and the gun's reliability kept them alive when nothing else did. It was accurate enough that some crews used it almost like a rifle. Loved by the men who carried it and respected by the enemy who faced it, the Bren was the quiet, dependable heart of the airborne squad. Number 8. Now here is a weapon whose reputation reached almost mythic heights. The gammon bomb's bigger, meaner cousin in the anti-tank fight, the PIAT. This was a British spring-launched projector that hurled a bomb capable of gutting a tank, and it did it without the telltale backblast of a rocket launcher, which meant a man could fire it from inside a building without cooking himself. The catch was the spring. Cocking the PIAT the first time was a brutal, full-body wrestling match that left men gasping, and it kicked like a mule when fired. Airborne troops at Arnhem used it to knock out German armor in the streets, sometimes at ranges so short they could have thrown a stone. It was awkward, heavy, and hated in equal measure to the respect it earned. But when a paratrooper with no artillery needed to stop a tank, the ugly, cantankerous PIAT was often all he had, and often enough, it was all he needed. Number 7. The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife was designed for one purpose, and it made no pretense otherwise. This slim, needle-pointed dagger was balanced to slip between ribs, and it became the badge of the commando and the airborne raider. Two ex-policemen who had learned close-quarter killing on the brutal streets of Shanghai designed it to a chilling specification, a blade for the silent work that longer weapons could not do. A raider slipping through an enemy camp in the dark carried one strapped to his leg for the sentry who had to be removed without a sound. It was more than a tool. It became a symbol, worn with grim pride and stamped onto the insignia of elite units. Few of the men who carried it ever used it for its true purpose, and most were grateful for that. But the knife's very existence spoke to how personal and merciless the war behind the lines could be. Number 6. The M1911 pistol was the sidearm every American trooper trusted with his life. And behind enemy lines, a pistol was often the only weapon a man could reach in time. This heavy .45 caliber automatic had already served for over 30 years, and it had earned a reputation as a fight stopper, its fat, slow bullet knocking a man down where lighter rounds might not. A paratrooper landing in the dark, before he could recover his rifle from a bundle or a leg bag, had this on his hip, 7 rounds of insurance against the sentry who stumbled onto him first. It was rugged enough to survive a hard landing in the mud and simple enough to work when caked in filth. Officers, machine gun crews, and mortar men who could not carry a long weapon relied on it as their primary defense. Solid, forgiving, and utterly dependable, the .45 caliber was the last-ditch companion of the men who fell from the sky. Number 5. The Sten gun was the cheapest submachine gun of the war, and its ugliness hid a strange kind of genius. It was little more than a pipe, a bolt, a spring, and a magazine that jutted out to the side, stamped and welded together for a few dollars so that Britain could arm entire airborne divisions and resistance movements at a price it could actually afford. It rattled, it looked like plumbing, and its side-mounted magazine was notorious for jamming if a man held it wrong. Yet the Sten's virtues were exactly what a paratrooper needed. It broke down small, it weighed almost nothing, and there were always more of them. British airborne troops jumped with it across Europe, and resistance fighters built copies in hidden workshops. It was crude, it was unlovely, and it armed the men who fought in the shadows when nothing better could be spared. Sometimes cheap and available beats, beautiful and rare. Number 4. The Thompson submachine gun was the weapon Hollywood made famous, and the paratroopers who carried it knew its worth went far beyond the movies. The Tommy gun fired the heavy .45 caliber round from a stick or drum magazine, and up close it was devastating. A wall of lead that ended arguments instantly in a hedgerow or a farmhouse hallway. Airborne officers and squad leaders prized it for the sheer authority it brought to a close fight, where its stopping power made every hit count. The catch was that it was heavy and expensive, machined from solid steel by craftsmen at a time when the war demanded speed and quantity. That cost is why the crude grease gun was invented to replace it. But the men who jumped with a Thompson rarely wanted to give it up. It felt substantial, it hit hard, and in the confusion of a night drop, that mattered more than any spec sheet. Number 3. The M1A1 carbine was built for exactly one kind of soldier, the paratrooper, and it showed in every detail. It was a light, handy rifle that fired a round midway between a pistol and a full battle cartridge, easy to shoot and easy to carry, and its defining feature was a folding wire stock that let it collapse to almost half its length. A trooper could clip it across his chest, jump, and have it into action seconds after his boots hit the dirt. No bundle to recover, no long barrel to snag in a tree. For men who landed scattered and alone in the dark, that instant readiness was priceless. It lacked the punch of the full-size Garand at long range, but in the close, fast fighting of a night drop, its speed and lightness won out. The folding stock carbine became an icon of the airborne, the weapon that jumped when it counted. Number 2. The Bren-carrying men, the Sten gunners, the mortar crews, all of them owed something to the machine that carried them, but no weapon captured the airborne idea more purely than the one still waiting at number 1. Before we reach it, consider what all of these tools had in common. Every one of them was shaped by a single, unforgiving fact that a man was about to fall out of the sky into the middle of the enemy with only what he could strap to his body. Weight, size, silence, and instant readiness were not conveniences. They were the difference between fighting and dying in a field before you found your feet. That brutal logic drove designers to invent weapons found nowhere else in the war, and it produced, at the very top of this list, the single most advanced infantry weapon any nation fielded in the entire conflict. Number 1. The FG-42 was the rifle that should not have existed in 1942, and yet the German Fallschirmjäger jumped with it. Faced with the disaster of Crete, where paratroopers landed armed with only pistols and died reaching for their rifles, German designers demanded the impossible, a single weapon that could do the work of a rifle, a submachine gun, and a light machine gun, yet be light enough to jump with in the hand. What they built was a marvel. It fired the full-power rifle cartridge, fed from a side-mounted magazine, switched between single shots and full automatic, and folded a spike bayonet under the barrel. It was expensive, complicated, and made in small numbers, which is why so few people have ever heard of it. But engineers who studied, captured examples after the war, borrowed its ideas for decades. The FG-42 was a glimpse of the future, dropped from the sky a generation too early. So there they are, 25 weapons that fell out of the sky with the men who fought the loneliest battles of the war. From a flat little mine you could throw under a truck to a rifle so advanced it took the world 40 years to catch up. Most of them vanished the day the fighting stopped, remembered now only by collectors and the families of the men who carried them. Which one surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments, and if you learned something today, hit subscribe, because next time we are diving into the war's most secret gear of all.